Mosaic, a daily news program from Worldlink TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
Welcome to the News in Brief from Abu Dhabi Television. Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri forms a new government which includes 30 ministers. This is the third government under the presidency of Emil Lahoud. The U.S. Central Command in Doha announces that it arrested Saddam Hussein's half-brother and the former director of Iraq's intelligence agency. The Egyptian President and Syrian Foreign Minister discussed the developments in Iraq, and Syria welcomes the U.S. Secretary of State's intended visit to Damascus. Now, to our correspondent in Cairo, Tariq al-Shami.
The Syrian Prime Minister, Farouk al-Shara, achieved his goal during his visit to Cairo, getting responses from Egyptian officials and the Arab League. He received support for Damascus in light of the U.S. threats, which may explain Syria's assertion that they will not submit to UN inspections unless the entire Middle East is also free of weapons of mass destruction.
The European Union urges the United Nations to play a vital role in redeveloping Iraq, reiterating that they want to monitor Iraq and the entire region. The Palestinian president meets with a number of European envoys, asserting their country's commitment to implementing the roadmap immediately after announcing the new Palestinian cabinet. Now to our correspondent in Ramallah, Majid Saeed.
Israel has reservations over European intervention in security issues. Nevertheless, Western diplomats rushed to Arafat's office, assuring the implementation of the roadmap, hoping that the new Palestinian government will soon be announced so that the road plan can be implemented.
Thank you for watching the News in Brief.
An Iraqi child says, "Am I going to live with my uncle because the Americans destroyed my house?" Another child says, "I am looking for my family and didn't find anyone yet." Many stories like these are being repeated in Iraq, children telling stories that will run shivers through the body. The child, Ali Ismail Abbas, may have been one of the luckier children compared with other Iraqi children. Despite his miseries, he was able to find someone to tend to his wounds and give him the appropriate care, in contrast to the millions of other children suffering from deprivation and neglect. Until now, international agencies have not been able to fully estimate the effects of war on the children of Iraq. However, the situation must be worse than the conditions they suffered for a decade under sanctions. According to reports by the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, children make up half of Iraq's population. Their statistics prior to the war indicated that 1/4 of children under the age of 12 were deprived from education, in addition to 1 million children under the age of 5 suffering from malnutrition, and 70% of them die from intestinal diseases due to contaminated water. The unstable security situation continues to hinder humanitarian aid to Iraqis. International agencies strongly criticize the coalition forces for their inability to perform their duties. Conditions deteriorated as a result of the ransacking of the hospitals, emptying them from medical supplies that may save the lives of thousands of Iraqi children. Southern Iraq is the center of the catastrophe. Contaminated water destroys the already weak bodies, in addition to viruses and plagues. The United Nations efforts do not meet their expectations in this field. Water supplies arrive sporadically, as permissible by the situation on the ground. The list of complaints increases, including the interruption of education, contaminated air, the emotional distresses caused by war, and the loss of basic children's rights, such as playing and being happy. Until the Iraqis are convinced that their country is strong again, the suffering of the children will remain the only indication whether or not Iraq enters the promised future. A Syrian official undermined the significance of Washington's decision to block the flow of 200,000 barrels of oil per day through a pipeline from Iraq to Syria. Meanwhile, new regional developments have prompted fears that the Syrian economy will be weakened, especially after halting work on the pipeline in addition to the U.S. threats to impose sanctions on Damascus. Notably, Syria is already experiencing difficult times in developing its economy.
Although the people in Syria are concerned about the U.S. threats, there are no real effects to the Syrian economy. Though the U.S. threats are impacting Syrians emotionally, the performance of the economy and people's daily lives remain unaffected. This is demonstrated by the nature of limited economic ties between the United States and Syria, as well as the lack of American investments in Syria.
The United States cannot cause additional harm by imposing further sanctions on Syria. In addition, the relationship between the two countries is very limited, which explains why the sanctions would have no effect on Syria's economy at all. Furthermore, no other country will adopt these sanctions based on falsehoods.
Syrian markets do not carry many American products. Additionally, the Syrian economy has not been affected by sanctions imposed by some American companies. Hence, Syrian businessmen and other economic sectors, which usually receive foreign investments, do not rely on any kind of bilateral economic relationship. Instead, they depend on growing economic relationships with neighboring countries and some European markets.
If the sanctions were placed only on foreign investments, there would not be any negative effects. However, if they were comprehensive sanctions, then there would be some notable consequences, especially in trade and, in particular, American imports to Syria.
American accusations and criticism do not surprise the Syrians. Also, the economic implications of the British and American occupation of Iraq have not caused panic in the Syrian economy. This is because previous preparational measures were taken and the Syrian economy is built on simple and basic foundations. Nada Subhi, Abu Dhabi Television.
President Hosni Mubarak met on Thursday with Syrian Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Farouk al-Shara. The talks focused on recent U.S. allegations that Syria was sheltering fleeing Iraqi officials and was possessing chemical weapons. At a press conference after meeting with Arab League chief Amr Moussa, al-Shara told Nile TV's Shahira Amin that he welcomes talks with the U.S. officials.
Amid increasing tension in the region following U.S. allegations that Syria possesses chemical weapons and is a supporter of terrorism, Syrian Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Farouk al-Shara is currently on a visit to Egypt for consultations with President Mubarak and senior Egyptian officials on how best to deal with the American threats. Following talks with Arab League chief Amr Moussa, Mr. al-Shara told reporters occupation is not the right response for stability in Iraq. He suggested instead that the right response was the withdrawal of invading forces from Iraq, allowing the Iraqi people to decide for themselves what is in their best interest as a government. Responding to a question from Nile TV on whether there had been any initial reactions from U.S. officials on al-Shara's recent comments about looking into the issue of weapons of mass destruction in other Middle Eastern countries, the Syrian diplomat replied,
"To tell you the truth, I haven't seen anything new in this demand. This demand has been expressed by some congressmen for so many decades, not only for so many years. They are wrong. I mean, I can tell you because they are wrong because they didn't try to search for the truth. They are wrong because they didn't try to have independent sources to rely on. They are wrong because they have made these allegations and accusations out of anger, out of disinformation.
We've heard you express deep concern at the so-called domino effect theory that the U.S. is applying in the region. Did you discuss this at the United Nations recently? And
Oh yes, of course I discussed the issue with the Secretary General, with the Foreign Minister of Mexico, who is the President of the Security Council, and with different members of the Council. Especially in the light of the threats or the statements and declarations by some high officials in the United States concerning Syria. But at the same time, I should refer to what the Secretary of State has said recently, has emphasized recently that this is not the case, and that they are not threatening Syria, nor do they want to attack any other Arab country. This is reassuring, but still, because of the position taken by the so-called hoax in certain circles in the United States, and their insistence to continue a different policy other than what is desired in order to calm down and stabilize the region. Because of this, we have to follow those developments with extreme concern, and that's why we discussed that at length with the Foreign Minister this morning.
Egypt has made it clear it wants to assist the Iraqi people in every way possible. Will Egypt's role be restricted to humanitarian aid and relief?
Well, humanitarian aid and relief is not a small thing or an unimportant element. This is very, very important. However, the political side, the establishment of an Iraqi government worthy of the name in order to represent the Iraqi people is the most important step that should be taken and as soon as they can. And this requires the withdrawal of the foreign forces very soon. The immediate is better than soon enough. The Iraqis should be given the opportunity to meet together, and through conciliation and through consensus, a leadership would emerge.
Is Syria next in the U.S. hit list? Recent U.S. accusations that Syria possesses chemical weapons and is giving free haven to fleeing Iraqis are certainly a cause for concern, not just for Syria, but for the entire Arab region. Shahira Amin, Nile TV International.
U.S.-led forces searching for members of Saddam Hussein's government had captured the ousted Iraqi leader's half-brother and former head of Iraqi intelligence in Baghdad on Thursday. U.S. Army General Vincent Brooks told a news conference at war headquarters in Qatar that the coalition special operations forces supported by the U.S. Marines had captured Barzan Ibrahim Hassan al-Tikriti. He added that Barzan was captured alone based on a tip from the Iraqis. Barzan was number 52 of the 55 most wanted Iraqis. Saddam and his two sons, Qusay and Uday, are still at the top of the list. U.S. officials say that they do not know if they are dead or alive after 2 airstrikes aimed at killing Saddam, but they said that the success of the war does not depend on finding them.
Commander of the U.S.-led forces in Iraq, General Tommy Franks, entered for the first time Baghdad. The capital of 5 million people is still largely without water and power after 3 weeks of intensive U.S.-led bombing shattered the infrastructure. The situation on the ground remained tense, especially in northern cities where bloody incidents occurred.
U.S. General Tommy Franks made his first trip to Baghdad on Wednesday, landing at the capital's airport. Franks, who directed the U.S.-led attack on Iraq, was seen pumping his fist in the air towards U.S. troops at the Baghdad International Airport. It was the four-star general's second trip to Iraq since the start of the war and was billed as a meeting with his top commanders and a moral booster for troops. Shortly after his arrival, Franks boarded the motorcade to meet his generals at Saddam Hussein's Abu Ghraib North Palace just outside the capital, but officials at U.S. Central Command could not confirm his next destination. On the other hand, and after nearly 2 weeks on the U.S. occupation of Baghdad, the situation remained tense, with more clashes and looting taking place in different parts of the city of 5 million. U.S. forces began taking a portion of their responsibility towards the Iraqi people. U.S. Marines hope to restore electricity supplies to more than 50% of the population of the Iraqi capital by Friday, a military spokesman said. The U.S. aggression against Iraq did not end with the end of bombing and killing. Indications point that Iraq is heading towards a critical phase represented by the missiles left behind by Saddam Hussein regime. One Iraqi civilian was killed and 2 others wounded, along with 3 U.S. soldiers, when ordnance exploded while in the process of inspecting a munition site. But the explosion of these missiles is not the only threat that endangers Iraqi lives. After U.S. forces encouraged looters to ransack and destroy governmental buildings, looters raided on a medical laboratory specialized in analyzing various kinds of viruses and finding the vaccine for them.
This laboratory was stolen 3 days ago, and everything was stolen from it, freezers and virus containers. The viruses stolen were AIDS, malaria, hepatitis, and other dangerous viruses. Some of them were destroyed outside the laboratory on the street. We are threatened by a major catastrophe in Iraq, all of us. We call for help in the name of humanity, Islam, and childhood.
We addressed the Americans and they told us that they knew about this since 3 days and they did nothing. The specialized doctor told us that he would leave Iraq tomorrow, so they cannot help us.
Hospitals across the country, meanwhile, are in a horrific state. Most of them are lacking basic medical supplies and are unable to cope in the increase of patients and injured during the U.S. war against Iraq. In another Baghdad hospital, staff have been forced to bury unidentified war victims in a makeshift grave. A brother and a sister, aged 1 and 2, were buried side by side after being killed by U.S. bombs. Staff said they were injured by coalition bombs and died later in hospital. In all, about 40 bodies were interred, all unidentified and waiting to be claimed by relatives. Missiles, loneliness, deaths and orphans, intelligence and occupation. What do the coming days hide for these Iraqis? Or what do the Iraqis hide for the new occupiers?
Manar channel knew from close sources that prior to the U.S. war against Iraq, the United States had set out a project in which Iraq will be divided into 3 separate military sectors under the authority of the Americans. They will be in control of the oil, defense and money, while the Iraqis will manage interior daily issues. Meanwhile, the phenomenon of anti-U.S. protest is growing throughout Iraq in a clear message that to the U.S. that Iraqis will not be easy to be ruled by a foreign force. The Supreme Assembly of the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, a major Shiite Iraqi group which boycotted the Nasriya meeting, is to stage a huge counter-gathering in the southern city of Karbala to reiterate once again their refusal to any foreign occupation.
Attempts by the United States to get applause over the opposition meeting of some Iraqi groups 2 days earlier and to downplay the fact that some groups boycotted the Nasriya meeting have drastically failed. Voices of rejection of the U.S. occupation of Iraq ran higher and higher after 2 days of the meeting under the auspices and the leadership of the United States. Baghdad, the capital, Mosul in the north, and Karbala, Najaf, Basra, Nasiriyah, Samawa, and other areas in the south are all voicing one call: U.S. get out. Scores of Muslims in the capital shouted their rejection of the U.S. military presence. They stood in front of American Marines deployed around Palestine Hotel and chanted, "Down with America." In Mosul, 20 Iraqis were killed in the last 2 days by the U.S. occupation forces as they were protesting against their military presence and the new governor the U.S. chose for them. Iraqi witnesses said that on both days U.S. troops fired into crowds, but the CENTCOM spokesman in Qatar, Vincent Brooks, claimed the U.S. troops were returning fire at gunmen. Similar scenes were seen in Basra and Karbala, two southern cities, where Muslims took to the streets to protest against plans for a U.S. interim authority. The Supreme Assembly of the Islamic Revolution in Iraq, a major Shiite Iraqi group which boycotted the meeting, is to stage a huge counter-gathering in Karbala to reiterate once again the refusal to any foreign occupation. Supreme Assembly leader Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Hakim called on Shiite Muslims to gather on April 23rd to mark the anniversary of the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, the grandson of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them. Imam Hussein was killed in Karbala as he fought for justice and refuted oppression, a situation that is much compatible with what Iraqis are facing now. Sayyid Hakim stressed on the importance of preserving Iraqi national rights. He said in a statement that Iraq should be governed by a regime that secures freedom, independence and justice. He also refused any foreign hegemony and stressed that Iraqis should decide how to shape their country's future. He also called on the Iraqis to respect all religious figures. The Supreme Assembly leaders who have been in exile during Saddam's regime plan to have a role in leading the Iraqis to self-determination. For that, Sayyid Abdulaziz al-Hakim, a member of this Islamic movement, arrived at Al-Quds city in Iraq, where thousands took to the streets to hail his arrival. This is the first blow for the U.S. plans to clamp down on any anti-U.S. movement. A Manar channel knew from close sources that prior to the war, the U.S. had set out a project in which Iraq will be divided into 3 separate military sectors assigned to the Army, the Marines and other U.S.-led forces in response to rapidly shifting missions. Each sector will comprise a team of 16 employees, 8 of them are Americans and the others are Iraqis. The Americans will be in control of the oil, defense and money, while the Iraqis will manage the interior daily issues.
In Washington, a State Department official said that U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell may travel to Syria for talks on diffusing tension between the two countries. But in the meantime, U.S. officials continued their campaign against Damascus, with U.S. Ambassador to the UN John Negroponte saying that Syria was disrupting a solution to the Israeli-Arab conflict by supporting Hezbollah. Knowing that Israel was behind the campaign and has banned weapons, Syria introduced a draft resolution to the UN Security Council calling for the entire Middle East region to be declared a weapons of mass destruction-free zone.
Hiding weapons of mass destruction, harboring Iraqi officials, Washington's unproven accusations are many against Syria these recent days. But the reason behind the fierce Israeli-directed campaign against Damascus was made clear when U.S. Ambassador to the UN John Negroponte accused Syria of disrupting efforts for finding a solution to Israeli-Palestinian conflict by backing Hezbollah.
In fact, I devoted quite a bit of time in the Council today to talking about Syria's ongoing support for the Hezbollah, the fact that it harbors Palestinian rejectionist groups, and we think those activities on the part of Syria are an obstacle to the Middle East peace process, and we think that they need to seriously consider their actions in this regard if they wish to see the process move forward.
In answer to U.S. allegations that it had chemical weapons, Syria, in a closed meeting in the UN, introduced a draft resolution to the Security Council saying Arab countries want a UN resolution declaring the Middle East a zone free of weapons of mass destruction. Negroponte declared this proposition did not mean that the U.S. was prepared to adopt it, and once again he claimed the U.S. believed that Syria had tried to acquire the materials needed to make chemical weapons.
We were concerned about Syria's own WMD, and obviously if a council member or any member of the United Nations proposes a resolution for consideration, we're prepared to consider it. That doesn't mean we're prepared to adopt it, embrace it, or endorse it in any way, shape, or form.
The draft calls the Council to take the central role in countering the spread of nuclear, biological and chemical weapons in the region. Syrian ambassador to the UN, Mikhail Wehbe, said the resolution was intended to promote peace and security in the region. The move is aimed at Israel, which has been blamed for escalating U.S. threats against Syria and is the only government in the region, the body of treaties and conventions covering weapons of mass destruction in the Middle East. Syria presented the draft on behalf of the 21 Arab members of the UN as it denied the U.S. charges.
We many times declared and rejected these accusations against Syria that we have terrorist group. In particular as well, they are talking about Hezbollah. Hezbollah is a Lebanese, absolutely and pure Lebanese resistance power.
And in Cairo, a day before the arrival of Syrian Foreign Minister Farouk al-Shara, the Egyptian President advisor Osama al-Baz accused Israel of standing behind the American campaign in the aim of forcing Syria to give Israel political concessions. Iran, for its part, clarified that it stands with Syria in the face of American pressure for the reason of defending the Palestinian case. However, Iranian President Sayyid Mohammad Khatami ruled out any U.S. military action against Syria, notifying that there is a big difference between the Iraqi and the Syrian case.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support provided by Henry and Virgilia Dakin.